Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to cover episodes 798 through 800, which will cover manga chapters 836 through 839. Although 836 is like one page, so really it's more like 837 through halfway through 839. But yeah, we've now reached 800 episodes in the series, which is honestly crazy to me that I've gone through 800 of these episodes. But we're only about 360 episodes behind until we catch up to the anime itself, which is nuts to me that I never thought that I would ever actually catch up, to be honest. I just kind of started doing this and just kept going. But yeah, we're almost there. It's kind of crazy. But anyways, let's move on to the synopsis. So still stuck in the seducing woods, the Straw Hats now have to contend with not just one, but two of Big Mom's children. However, this new threat is one of the Sweet Three generals and Big Mom's top commanders. And on another part of Whole Cake Island, Sanji now has to come face to face with his two older brothers, Niji and Ichiji, for the first time since his cruel childhood. Alright, so differences. So you'll notice that this podcast episode is going to be a little bit shorter because there's so much filler in these episodes. And a lot of differences crop up here, so I'm going to go through them as quickly as possible. But the beginning of episode 798 and the start to the Luffy versus Cracker fight is entirely filler, where we see a bunch more homies wither away due to Cracker's haki. Additionally, Luffy using Red Hawk in Gear 2nd, as well as Cracker growing more arms while attacking Luffy. It is added technically. The canon portion doesn't actually resume until Luffy gets launched back towards where Pound and Nami are, and Cracker officially introduces himself after sprouting all 4 of his additional arms, giving him 6 in total. But even after that, Luffy continues to use Gear 2nd to attack Cracker. But in the manga, his first actual attack is in Gear 3rd, which is the elephant gun. The anime actually shows us an additional to Cracker's introduction or not Cracker's introduction, but to Brulee's little explanation, is that Rouge was one of the people from the worst generation to attack Whole Cake Island and Big Mom. But Rouge was the first one to actually get somewhat further in by being able to defeat the 4th Sweet General, and then they were subsequently defeated by Cracker. I'm not going to name this one because it's kind of a little bit of a spoiler, but anyways. The anime adds many additional attacks from Luffy during his fight with Cracker. For example, in the anime, he does Jet Stamp Gatling. We also later see him use Gigant Axe and Grizzly Magnum when he swaps to trying to use Gear 3rd as well. But again, this isn't in the manga. In the manga, he goes straight for the more powerful Haki-imbued Hawk Gatling, and that's the only move he uses in that little stretch. And at the beginning of episode 799, there's an added scene of Reiju talking to Sanji about the fact that Ichiji and Niji will arrive the next day, as well as Sanji kind of admiring a butterfly as sort of a symbol of freedom and how he's kind of lost it at this point. That's all added for the anime as well. There's an added scene after Luffy blows Cracker away with Kong Gun of Pedro and Brook coming across a guard that looks a lot like Cracker, hinting at the fact that the Cracker that we are seeing isn't really him. Additionally, after this scene, we see Carrot and Chopper stuck in the mirror world trying to figure things out in there. Then following that scene, we get another scene where Nami basically commands the homies, including Randolph and King Bomb, to do her bidding using the power of Big Mom's Vivera card that he got from Lola, or that she got from Lola. These scenes are all kind of there to set up scenes that actually do take place in the manga, but all these scenes are very redundant because, again, a similar scene that actually does progress the plot forward takes place just a few minutes from there. And in the manga, these scenes are implied to have actually occurred, but they happen off screen, and in the manga, the Luffy and Cracker fight just kind of continues on without interruption. And that's one of the biggest issues of the Cracker versus Luffy fight, is just how long it takes because of all these different interruptions that keep happening. Anyways, another change is in episode 800, the anime extends the scene where we see what is going on with Nami and Pound, as well as Chopper and Carrot, and Brook and Pedro. They add a bit more context or setup to each of their scenes. It's nothing major, but I really like what they add to Brook and Pedro's section, and I'll go into more detail in the main section of this podcast, so I'll leave it at that for now. And then finally, before the reveal of Ichiji and Niji arriving, the anime inserts the actual continuation of Luffy fighting Cracker, where he uses Kong Organ, whereas in the manga it goes from Brook and Pedro sneaking in the Biscuit Soldier straight to the scene where Ichiji and Niji arrive. The Luffy versus Cracker fight is an absolute mess in the anime. They make this fight way longer than it needs to be, and it's already a long fight to begin with, because that's the whole point of this fight, is it's incredibly drawn out, and Oda does kind of demonstrate that, but the anime makes it almost unbearable. If you read this in the manga, the flow is much better because, first of all, it's not chopped up into these annoying little bits, and you can never get any sort of momentum going. Then it also feels like it drags so much because so much is happening without any progress being made. It does make for a really frustrating watch. And I get some of that is the point. Like, Oda is trying to show that this is a very drawn out and long fight. It's mostly a fight of attrition. But my God, the anime makes this so bad. Yeah, this was really hard to get through originally when I watched this in the anime. Anyway, so that does it for the differences. So let's get into the episodes themselves. To start off, it's here we finally get our official introduction to Charlotte Cracker and learn that he has an absurd bounty of 860 million berries, which is a whopping 360 million more than Luffy's current bounty of 500 million. Not that bounty prices have really mattered to Luffy's ability to take on an opponent, but that is quite the jump. Nami tries to convince Luffy to not take this fight, as their objective isn't to defeat him nor any of the Big Mom pirates, but is to get away and find Sanji. But Luffy isn't having any of that and wants to go all out and stubbornly decides to stay and fight. It's never explicitly stated why Luffy is so stubborn here, but I think the implication is that Luffy has sensed how powerful Cracker is, and that both for his own selfish reasons, he wants to take him on, but also knowing, Luffy, he understands that running in this situation is probably not going to do much good, since he's been running around for a while now trying to get out of there without much success, and having someone this strong on their tail is probably not going to yield much better outcomes. So for both his own personal reasons and strategic reasons, I think this is why he stands his ground and decides to take on Cracker, despite how big of a power difference it's seemingly there between them. It's pretty clear early on that there is a sizable gap in strength between Luffy and Cracker. I guess I should say that it's more of a bad matchup between Luffy and Cracker, as Cracker seems to be incredibly hard to the point where Gear 2nd and 3rd attacks are pretty much ineffective against him, and Luffy is launched back. This is where it dawned on Nami the words Chopper had mentioned earlier, that they were clearly underestimating an Emperor's strength, as Luffy is struggling even against Big Mom's underlings. Despite not wanting to see your main character lose, I did actually really like and appreciate that now that they are taking on the next level of pirates, things are starting to get ramped up. They aren't fighting the Shichibukai anymore. These are the Yonko, and it's good that Oda is raising the stakes and threat level when it comes to these guys. It gives this arc a sense of dread and danger that I feel like we haven't had in a while. To demonstrate this point even further, we get that monologue from Brule about the other Worst Generation members that have come into Totoland territory and across Big Mom's pirates, and how they've all failed despite having similar lofty dreams of becoming the Pirate King, just like Luffy and the Straw Hats, painting a picture that seems threateningly insurmountable. Like, we get a montage of Kid, Apu, Bej, and even Rouge. And outside of Bej, who of course we know decided to join Big Mom's crew rather than face defeat, we learn that the other three didn't even get to see Big Mom, meaning they couldn't even get past her underlings. The really surprising revelation here was that Brule mentions the person that actually got the furthest was Rouge, who was actually able to take down one of the sweet generals. Basically, he was able to take down someone on the level of Cracker who is fighting Luffy and is struggling against right at this very minute. But eventually, he was taken down by Cracker, Although the flashback scene of Urouge fighting Cracker was not in the manga, it is interesting to see more of Urouge in action because he's kind of the forgotten worst generation supernova member and has the least amount of screen time and development. He's quite strong though, being able to defeat one of the Sweet Generals. Now we don't know his double fruit yet, but it seems to have been confirmed in the One Piece sort of Deep Blue companion book that he does have some kind of a devil fruit that allows him to absorb damage and turn it into strength, kind of similar to how Vegeta's Ultra Ego form works in Dragon Ball Super. Nami almost gets dragged into the mirror world, but Pound comes in for the save, sacrificing his standing with Big Mom. Not that it was a good place to begin with, but Nami, once free, again shows up just how strong she's become with Usopp's new sorcery climb attack. By lightning bolting Brule back into the mirror, Nami starts to figure out the power of the Vipera card she got from Lola and has this sadistic grin on her face, realizing what she can do with it. And I love when Nami gets like this sort of like tinge of cruelty and like manipulative sort of energy with her. But getting back to Luffy, we see him throwing everything at Cracker from Gear 2nd to Gear 3rd, both with and without Haki, but nothing is getting past Cracker's Biscuits imbued with armament Haki and the defensive capabilities that affords him. You can tell Luffy is beginning to lose stamina as well, and the anime makes this fact much more apparent than it does in the manga as we see him beginning to struggle. And also, one fact that's not conveyed all that well by Oda is that a lot of time has passed. As you can tell, it's already nightfall, so this fight has gone on at least a few hours non-stop. And it's here you can tell Luffy is beginning to wear down and eventually gets pinned by Cracker to the ground, but then we get an awesome and very Luffy moment when he starts disrespecting Sanji and puts words into his mouth, particularly when he says, Cracker basically infers that Sanji would say, "Go away, you pathetic inferior pirate." And this sets Luffy off. And this is where he decides to finally activate Gear 4th and instantly blows Cracker away with a Gomu Gomu no Kong gun. This moment is freaking awesome, especially in the manga. The anime again kind of ruins it for the sake of dragging out the pacing, because in the anime, they add all this extra conversation between the two and Luffy announcing Muscle Balloon and Gear 4th, while in the manga, the impression that Cracker insulting Sanji would even dare say something like that enrages Luffy to the point where he just instantly retaliates and just blows Cracker away without warning. While the anime depicts this, it's the way it's depicted seems to kind of rob a little bit out of that intensity and character moment away from this scene, because like, I don't know, when I read this in the manga, like I imagine this scene to play out like Cracker says that insult, that Sanji would say something this disrespectful about his crew, and then instantly Luffy just like goes Gear 4th and just boom, just blows him away. Whereas in the anime, it's like dragged out. It's like he goes into Muscle Balloon and then he says Gear 4th, and then they have this conversation, and then Luffy decides to blow him away. Like I feel like it takes away from some of that like rage that Luffy feels and is depicted in the manga. Like in the manga, it just seems like, yeah, I am pissed. You just made a huge mistake and just blows him away. And that's kind of missing from the anime version because, again, they try to drag this out. But anyways, Gear 4th is finally enough to break through the defensive capabilities of Cracker, but twist! That wasn't the real Cracker. And the person that Luffy has been fighting this whole time was an armor, and the real Cracker was hiding inside of it. And I love how, for dramatic effect, when Oda had Luffy knock the Biscuit Cracker, it appeared like he was like spewing blood. But to address this, Oda has Luffy ask in the story, and Cracker explains that it was jam. But if you were making armor, why on earth would you need to go to the trouble of giving it fake blood using jam? And I suppose it could be for like strategic reasons, like mentally overwhelming the person, making them believe that they were able to make this fake armor bleed, but only to be shocked that it was armor. Now, Cracker himself explains it away, saying that he's a bit of an artist, and he did that to satisfy that artistic side of him. I guess it makes sense, but man, these are so excessive, but it's also just on brand with Oda's writing. And it's here we learn that Cracker's devil fruit power is the Bisu Bisu no Mi, or the biscuit fruit. Bisu is just short for biscuit, or bisquetto. And this allows him to infinitely produce biscuits when clapping his hands together, and he can then further manipulate them into various shapes. And given their incredible hardness, these particular biscuits may be a reference to a food called hardtack, which I had never heard of until I did research for this episode. And according to Wikipedia, hardtack is a type of dense cracker made from flour and small amounts of water, with salt being sometimes added. And hardtack is very inexpensive and long-lasting if kept dry, allowing it to be used for sustenance in the absence of perishable foods. It's commonly used during like long sea voyages, land migrations, and military campaigns. And along with salt pork and corned beef, hardtack was kind of a standard ration for many militaries and navies from the 17th to the 20th century. And yeah, it kind of reminds me of lambus bread from the Lord of the Rings series, to be honest. The other kind of funny thing about the fully revealed Cracker is that his hair have like these sparkler fireworks at the end of each of his little hair thingies, which is probably a secondary reference to his name, Cracker, in this case being a reference to firecrackers. This revelation is definitely bad news for Luffy, though, as a long drawn-out fight of attrition with an infinite an army of biscuit soldiers could be really bad for Luffy, considering what we saw of Gear 4th versus Doflamingo. He can't really maintain that form for too long before he runs out of stamina and becomes unable to move for several minutes. The Cracker versus Luffy fight, though, definitely has a lot of problems, as I've kind of alluded to up till now, in terms of like storytelling. Some of them warranted, others are just the community whining over nothing. But I think one thing that it really gets right is how Oda utilizes Nami during this fight. I love that without Nami, this fight may be impossible for Luffy to win, and you can see where she begins to have an impact by having the boldness to extort all the homies to the point where she's confident enough to stand inside King Bomb's mouth and give direct orders to all the homies to turn on Cracker and attack him. Chopper, on the other hand, has figured out that they can use Brulee's mirror world to find Sanji anywhere on the island, and this is also where we are introduced to Carrot's nickname for Chopper, Choniki, which is a mashup of Chopper and Aniki, or Chopper no Aniki. Aniki being big brother, but unlike sort of blood-related siblings, or even what Ace, Sabo, and Luffy had, this is more of sort of a respect thing. We saw this with the Frankie family back on Water 7, where everyone in the Frankie family called him Frankie no Aniki, or Big Bro Frankie, as a sign of respect. And I honestly think that is where Chopper actually got the inspiration for this, is that watching Frankie and the Frankie family, he kind of gets that inspiration as he sort of continues his growth in terms of his maturity. He's learning to take more charge and is now taking Carrot under his wing. And to denote this, he has her call him Big Bro Chopper, or Chopper no Aniki. But Chopper, or Carrot, funnily, doesn't quite get the full grasp of this concept and shortens it to Choniki to make it sound cute, and kind of robbing it of half of its sort of grandness. And officially this is translated as Chobro, but I have seen some fans still refer to it as Bropper. So if you see some fans refer to it, that's kind of what they're referring to as well. Now, in the same set of scenes, we also get to see what Brook and Pedro are up to, and they sneak into the belly of one of the Biscuit soldiers to bypass the castle's security. The anime adds this cool moment where we see how they snuck inside the Biscuit soldier, where Brook silently cuts the back of the Biscuit soldier with his quick slash ability. And you see in the manga, we're never actually shown how they get in there. The manga actually just immediately cuts to them already kind of like squished inside of it. So I really enjoyed the fact that they added this to explain how they got in there. And this is the type of filler I actually enjoy. Like, these things, it makes sense. Like, Oda didn't have the page count to be able to include that, and really needed to expedite his storytelling. And so I love these kinds of fillers where, yeah, it's kind of not necessary, but it really does help to add to the story of like, how did they get in there? And it's fun, and I like that kind of filler. What I don't like is when they keep repeating the same scenes over and over and over again, not progressing the plot or explaining anything to us, which is what happens with Luffy and Cracker. Anyways, Luffy goes all out back on Luffy and Cracker. Luffy goes all out at this point using Kong Oregon, the Gear 4th variant of Gum no Gatling, and while he's able to damage the Biscuits with the power boost of Gear 4th, Cracker can just keep building Biscuits, and he's now got to contend with facing Cracker as well, and now that he can build so many, there's like a half a dozen Biscuit or soldiers. And Oda is already setting us up for the fact that Gear 4th is already woefully underpowered in the face of an Emperor's crew, with there being 2 more powerful Sweet Generals in addition to Big Mom herself. And Oda likes the writing mechanism of showing us the previous attacks or power-ups that beat the last big boss in the previous arcs being inadequate in the next arc. But this is extreme to the point where you begin to wonder what kind of power-up is Luffy going to need to be able to beat Big Mom, or if this is a situation where he really isn't going to beat Big Mom, and really it's just sort of get in and get out as they originally planned. Because like I've mentioned in the past though, Oda is very good at giving us really powerful antagonists and set them up for future engagements for our main characters to face when they're actually ready. Kind of like what we saw with Mihawk, as well as with Kuma and Sabori and all the admirals for that matter. And so yeah, I like that Oda is already laying the seeds of just how big of a difference the Yonko Emperors are in comparison to where Luffy and the Straw Hats are right now, even after their major power-ups over the 2-year time skip. So it'll be really interesting to see how he's able to contend with the Emperors, both Big Mom and the eventual Kaido when they actually get to Wano. Oda is just really good at being a patient writer, seemingly the only mangaka in the business that actually does this kind of setup and work. But to be fair, with how cutthroat and unforgiving the manga industry is, especially in today's environment, he might be the only one who is actually afforded that luxury of time to build things up and not pay them off till far later. Most manga need to immediately see an audience latch onto their series and see immediate success, especially in Shonen Jump, because if you don't meet certain thresholds, you will get canceled. So there is certainly a balance you have to strike of being entertaining in the immediate present, but also being able to set things up for payoffs later on down the road. Or the route that I'm seeing most mangaka seemingly taking these days is to have a shorter sort of a run, but a predetermined story they want to tell, so that all of that can be worked towards right off the bat and not have to make your audience wait too long. Series like Demon Slayer come to mind, where the end of the story seems to have already been predetermined far in advance, and the story was only meant to last a certain amount of time, so that you didn't have like these sort of crazy long breaks between setups and payoffs. Because like Demon Slayer or Kimetsu no Yaiba is only 26 volumes, I think. That's about as long as like Wano took, which is insane. An entire arc in One Piece is almost as long as an entire series. So yeah, I do think it's a little bit of both, but I do wish more series would actually take the time to set things up. I think My Hero Academia does a decent job of this to an extent, but at the same time, I feel like My Hero's pacing is very awkward in terms of like, I think despite it being a 42 volume series, it like blasts through its series. Like the whole thing takes place in the span of about a calendar year. It feels like in the world time. Anyways, I don't want to get too far into the weeds of like other series, but yeah, it just seems interesting how Oda will actually go through the trouble of setting this up, and we don't get to see the payoff of this for like another like 3-4 years, to be honest. Like it's pretty crazy, at least in real time. Anyways, moving on from Cracker and Luffy for a bit, we head back to Big Mom and the Germa Kingdom, where we finally see Ichiji and Niji arrive in Whole Cake Island for the wedding. And this is our proper introduction to the two, as we get their epithets Sparking Red for Ichiji and Electric Blue for Niji. And at this point, it makes you wonder what Sanji's sort of Germa army epithet is if he even has one, I would imagine at the time I thought his would be something like yellow whatever. It's what I initially thought, and since they all seem to match their hair color, but I also thought Sanji wasn't born with a genetic enhancement, so what would his ability be? And we will eventually find out what it actually is, and it makes a lot of sense, but also was really unexpected. Both the epithet, the name, and the ability. Speaking of Sanji, though, your heart kind of breaks for him here. As you can clearly see, he is struggling, even experiencing some sort of a PTSD response from all the abuse he's received as a kid from the two. He grabs himself and begins to shake at the sight of Ichiji and Niji. It really sucks seeing Sanji this vulnerable when he's usually the one standing up for people in this type of situation. You understand why now he's so protective over people who are being abused or unable to defend themselves, in addition to why he's so kind to everyone, because he knows exactly what it's like to feel small and weak in the face of an oppressive abuser. When you see Niji mocking and goading Sanji, your blood just starts to boil, hoping that by the end of this arc that Sanji is able to beat the snot out of this guy, because he is annoying. I think he's the worst out of the four. Like, Ichiji is just like really stoic and kind of cruel, but he's for the most part like this really silent guy. Yonji is, we already know Sanji can beat Yonji, and also he's kind of just like this just annoying brat. Reiju obviously seems to actually sympathize a little bit with Sanji. Niji is just an ass. He is the asshole of that family. And Judge is Judge. Judge is the worst out of all of them because he's the one that caused all this to begin with. But we'll see more of the Vinsmokes and just see how bad they are to Sanji. Niji takes it one step further, though, and does the two things that piss Sanji off more than anything: wasting food and harming a woman by throwing his uneaten dish at Cosette, the head chef for the Vinsmoke family. There's always something about this moment that really stands out to the reader and viewer and to myself. Like, this is just cruel for the sake of being cruel. He orders Cosette to just stand there waiting for a superhuman to throw a ceramic plate at her face, all because of something Sanji said. Nothing to do with what she did, outside of maybe not liking her food. And there's this feeling of complete detachment from humanity with Niji. Like, he's only wired to feel joy in causing others pain, and that's all he can literally process. Like, it's almost like he has no idea of the concept of compassion, empathy, or kindness, or sympathy. Like, you can also see this in their dinner conversation just before. They all casually talk about the war they just manipulated, like it was a gardening task or something like that. Like, it was just something that they just had to do for extra chump change. It's crazy listening to them talk. And these episodes end with Sanji standing up and defending Cosette from Niji, but we'll see whether he gets into it like he did with Yonji. And at this point, I was wondering if, in classic Oda fashion, if their numbering matched their strength. So Sanji naturally would be stronger than Yonji because 3 is higher than 4, but it could be that Niji and Ichiji are inherently stronger than both of them because they're 2 and 1. But yeah, we'll have to wait to see in the next episode to see if that pattern holds true or not. But yeah, you hope that Sanji can hold his own against him. But anyways, that's where we'll end this episode. And if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. I really appreciate it. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section today. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye.